right, well, welcome back to the second bonus session of our church history class. And today we're going to be, or well, in this session anyway, we're going to be talking about Roman Judea. This is kind of a subset to what we were discussing in the previous session, which was the Roman Empire. And Roman Judea is important because this is sort of the, if you consider the Roman Empire as sort of the forest or the flower bed in which the church existed. Roman Judea is the specific plot where it grew up. It is sort of the test bed. It's like the Roman Empire. It provided the protection and the resources needed for the church to grow. That's something I probably didn't mention in our talk on the Roman Empire, is that the empire provided a great deal of protection and resources for the church to grow into the great organization that it did. So, in any case, we're going to be looking a bit at Roman Judea, and we're going to be looking at what were the events that led, starting with the Jewish history in the area, and how the Christians fit into that, and how the church fits into that, and their relationship, primarily the relationship of the Jewish people to the Roman Empire. All right. So this is what Europe or Eastern Europe and the Middle East looked like in the 200s BC. This is the time that we're going to be starting, and this is after the fall of Alexander's empire. So if you remember your ancient history, Alexander the Great had created an empire that stretched from Macedonia and Greece all the way to the Indus River Valley, or India. And it conquered Egypt and the great empire of Persia. You'll remember in the book of Daniel, Alexander is foretold in the book of Daniel. And he comes, but Alexander does not last very long. His empire grows. He's one of the great generals of the ancient world, but his empire doesn't last very long because he dies relatively young. And his empire is split into 4 pieces. The blue chunk down there is taken over by one of his generals named Ptolemy. And he founds the Ptolemaic dynasty. And the Ptolemaic dynasty ends with Cleopatra. And the Ptolemaic dynasty is known for its its inbreeding. So in the Ptolemaic dynasty, pure blood was very important, and royals had to be of pure blood. And so naturally, if you wanted the purest blood, you married royal with royal, and what could be better, of course, than marrying your brother or your sister to produce royal children. I know it's kind of gross. Makes you kind of wonder, after centuries of inbreeding, how good looking Cleopatra actually was. But anyway, that's a story for another day. Historical accounts say that she was pretty average. I can't imagine. But in any case, so you have Ptolemy takes Egypt and founds a new dynasty there, a Greek dynasty, which combines ancient Egyptian culture and language with Greek culture and language and melds them into this really kind of strange melding pot, quite interesting for the late Egyptian period. The big yellow part was taken on by a general named Seleucus, and he founds a Seleucid dynasty, which is important for us. And then there are some guys up north, Antipater and, who's the other guy? I didn't write it down. Well, shame on me. In any case, they're not important for our purposes, so we're just going to ignore them. The important part is this yellow part. This is the Seleucid Empire, and you'll see that Judea is in this portion here. So it's kind of a highway between the Seleucids and the Egyptians, and it was fought over by the Seleucids and the Egyptians. It's a strategic area, very important to both. So the Seleucid Empire is founded by Alexander the Great, General Seleucus, after Alexander's death. The Jews fare initially quite well under the Seleucids, so long as they were permitted their own internal governance. They did not brook interference in their affairs very kindly. They did not appreciate it when the Seleucids interfered, and they would often rebel if that happened. But generally speaking, initially at least, they did pretty well under the Seleucids. Then there was a period, the Jews actually underwent a period of Hellenization, or if you prefer, Greekification, under the Seleucids. So this is when Greek culture kind of made its way into their culture. And this happens a lot when you have a big dominant culture over sort of a smaller group. They tend to adopt the larger culture's values, their language, their norms, their ways of dress, that sort of thing. In this case, it wasn't so much religion, but Hellenization did occur. And so when you, just as an aside, when you see that word Hellen or Hellene in history, that's generally referring to the Greeks. The Greeks are the Hellenes. There is the Hellespont, which is like a Greek peninsula. In the modern time, the term King of the Hellenes was used as a formal title for King of Greece. So when you see that term Hellenization, that means Greekification, okay? But Hellenization sounds a lot better, and it's just more correct. For the Jews, many Jewish men took Hellenization to the extreme by engaging in a form of non-surgical foreskin restoration and by dropping universal circumcision for males. The Greeks, the Seleucids, the Romans, the pagans generally thought circumcision was a barbaric and a repulsive custom. They found it repulsive, actually. And so the Jews, in order to get along with their Greek overlords, would compromise by not adopting that practice or by dropping it or not practicing it as much as they should have. But despite the trends of Hellenization evident in Jewish society, so despite the fact that Jews were generally moving towards more agreement, or not agreement, but generally they were adopting more Greek cultural customs and norms, and Greek language and all that kind of thing, it wasn't good enough for one king. And that king was Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now, if you have a good study Bible, you will see his name mentioned probably in the book of Daniel and probably also in the book of Revelation in the footnotes. And Antiochus IV decides that he's going to stamp out the last vestige of Jewish independence and Jewish identity, which is the Jewish religion. So around 168 BC, he imposes new taxes on the Jews, and he builds a fortress in Jerusalem to establish his authority. He orders the suppression of Jewish religious rites and holidays, and in particular, he forbids the practice of the Sabbath. You cannot hold the Sabbath. He also forbade the observance of Jewish law. And he even went so far as to offend them by setting up a statue of Zeus on the Temple Mount and actually forbidding circumcision and possessing of Holy Scriptures. So he's really going at it. And he's underestimating, I think, the Jewish people here. I mean, this is, knowing what we know about the Jews and their zealous devotion to God and to their religion, this is a massive miscalculation on the part of Antiochus. And it will end up being so. But I just want to point out how this happens a lot in society. I mean, even when the Mennonites were in Russia, there were Mennonites who decided in order to make their way in society, instead of being separate and cut off, to make their way to gain greater economic power, they would become more Russified. They learned Russian, they engaged with the Russians, and they gained positions of power and authority and wealth, and they were industrialists and all that sort of thing. Kind of the same thing here. In order to move up in the administration, to get along, to make more money, the separateness of the Jews, for many of them, was compromised. And they adopted certain Greek cultural norms to allow them to better integrate with Greek society and to, I guess, make more money and gain more power and trust and all that kind of stuff. Well, maybe not power, but trust and economic freedom, I would say. So Antiochus has offended the Jews, and in 167 BC, they have had enough. And a priest called Matthias The Hasmonean, Matthias the Hasmonean, begins a revolt after he refused to worship the Greek gods. um, he has a son called Judah Maccabee, and Judah launches a successful guerrilla war campaign against the Seleucids. So he doesn't launch a traditional campaign with a big army and open fields. That's where the Seleucids shine. They got a big army too. He launches a successful guerrilla campaign, and his primary targets, at least initially, are fellow Jews, Hellenized Jews, Jews who have adopted Greek ways and Greek manners of dress and Greek customs. He destroys pagan altars that have been set up in Judea. He circumcises uncircumcised boys and men, and he kills those who resist circumcision. This is very serious. He is very zealous for his religion and for his culture. Antiochus is not going to take this lying down. He sends an army to crush the revolt, but before it arrives, the Maccabees had made a deal to ally themselves with the Roman Empire. Now, this is the Roman Republic at this time, and they're a rising power in the Mediterranean, but they're not dominant yet. They haven't made it this far yet into the Middle East and Asia Minor. They're still in Italy and in parts of Dalmatia and Greece. They haven't made it this far into they're not the dominant power in the Mediterranean yet. But they're really powerful. They have a very formidable army. Their economic wealth is growing, and so by allying with the Roman Republic, this is a very shrewd move. And the Seleucids are put in a tight spot because of Rome's dominant military power. They don't want to get into a battle with Rome. Antiochus IV died in the same year that this happened, and the new Seleucid leadership withdrew the army he sent and revoked Antiochus's anti-Jewish decrees. So Antiochus ends up losing this battle. There's a great deal of dead Seleucids in the area, and the revolt ends up in the foundation of a new kind of dynasty. After the army is withdrawn, the Temple Mount, or the temple itself, is ritually cleansed, and the Maccabees form a new kingdom under the protection of Rome. And it is known as the Hasmonean Kingdom or the Hasmonean Dynasty. And it is this victory which is celebrated in the festival of Hanukkah every year. So if you're wondering where Hanukkah comes from, you're not going to find it in the Old Testament with the Jewish festivals and holidays there. It comes from here with the Maccabean victory. If you're interested in reading more about this, there's an apocryphal book called Book of Maccabees that details this. You can go and read that. It's part of Catholic Bibles, but it is not in our Protestant Bible. So the Hasmonean Kingdom is legally part of the Seleucid Empire still, but is allied to Rome and has Rome as its protector. So this would be kind of like if, let's say, for example, Quebec declared its independence from Canada, and Canada said, well, no, you're not independent, but we're going to leave you to your own affairs. And the United States said, well, we're going to be the protector of Quebec. So Quebec is technically in Canada, but we would exercise very little jurisdiction over it. That's kind of how this sort of thing would work. So this is what the Hasmonean Kingdom looks like. It looks surprisingly like ancient Israel, the ancient kingdom of Israel. It's bounded in the west by the Mediterranean Sea, in the east by the River Jordan. You see the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea. They have some territory on the other side of it, much like ancient Israel. And there's different periods of expansion you can see there. But generally speaking, this is the Jewish kingdom of the Hasmonean dynasty. The kingdom itself is founded around 140 BC, so about 20 years after the victory of the Maccabees, when it was officially founded as a kingdom. And it was semi-autonomous and under the increasingly weak Seleucid Empire. It was recognized as a state by the Romans in 139. So at 140, it's established as a kingdom. The Romans say, we recognize this as a state, independent state, in 139. Independent recognition, or recognition of your independence, is important in diplomacy. If no country is willing to recognize your independence, it's going to be very hard for you to do deals with other countries, to get support from other countries, to work, to operate as other countries. And we see this in the modern world. There are places that want foreign recognition of their independence. Places like, I believe Kosovo would be one of them. Other places, in the Balkans, there's quite a few. In the Caucasus Mountains, there's some. but you need foreign recognition by a major government in order to make your independence kind of official. Um, the kings in the Hasmonean dynasty ruled as high priests. So the Pharisees, this is the period when Sadducees and Pharisees rise as opposing parties. The Pharisees generally opposed the expansion by conquest of the kingdom, and they wanted the office of king and high priest to be separated, which is how it was in the Jewish law. If you look in the Old Testament, the king of Israel is not the high priest. Those offices are not together, and they never are. The king is not allowed to be high priest. Remember when Saul tried to sacrifice, when Samuel wasn't there, that was a move that was highly condemned by God. And the Sadducees did not really see a problem with the combination of king and high priest. The Pharisees were very much an independent nationalistic streak, the Sadducees more in favor of Hellenization. So the Sadducees, as we all know from the Old Testament, formed the higher nobility, the ruling class, the wealthy, whereas the Pharisees were more teachers of the people, teachers of the law. They were evangelistic in nature, that sort of thing, whereas the Sadducees were not. The Pharisees believed in resurrection, the Sadducees did not, that sort of thing. So that's where they get established, and their differences form here. There's a civil war that erupted in the 60s BC between two members of the royal family of the Hasmonean kingdom, a guy named Hyrcanus, who was supported by the Pharisees, and Aristobulus, who was supported by the Sadducees. Hyrcanus was in favor of the separation of the king and high priesthood, and Aristobulus was not necessarily. So I think that's where the differences come in. The Romans used the civil unrest as an excuse to invade Judea and to turn it into a client state under the supervision of the governor of Syria. So they've made it to Syria at this point, and so they use this instability to say, oh, we're going to come in as your protector, we're going to solve this problem, we're going to set down, get some peace here, and they use it as a way of expanding their empire and their influence. So Pompey the Great is the guy who leads the army to conquer Jerusalem. And he is famous for entering the Holy of Holies. He desecrates the temple. He does not seize any treasures, which is different than what would happen in AD 70 with the Roman conquest at that time. But Pompey does desecrate the temple nonetheless. And Pompey is, if you remember previously, he is a great rival of Julius Caesar. And he's kind of pompous. I think that's where the word pompous comes from Pompey. He's very prideful, proud of himself, and he's a great general. He's very popular in Rome. So the Romans ruled Judea as a client kingdom, and they appointed a guy named Herod, an Idumean, as the successor to the Hasmoneans. And they make him responsible for internal policy, and the governor of Syria, again, is the supervisor of them. Herod marries one of the Hasmonean princesses to legitimate his succession to their throne. It kind of works, kind of doesn't, but he's a pretty good builder, and he's a pretty successful king, so people kind of just let it go, I guess. The Jews were permitted to judge each other under their own laws by the Romans, and they could even carry out capital punishment until 28 AD. So this is why Jesus is talking with Pontius Pilate. This is why the Jews bring him to Pontius Pilate, because several years earlier, they were not allowed to commit capital punishment. If Jesus had been around earlier, before AD 28, they could have killed him or stoned him to death on their own if they wanted to. But they now have to take him to Pilate in order to have him crucified. So that's an interesting shift there. The Jews were permitted to maintain their own religious practices without needing to add sacrifices to the Roman gods. And this was a break, as we've discussed, with normal Roman policy. And the Romans were keenly aware of the willingness of the Jews to drench their lands in blood and turn their cities and towns to ash before worshiping a foreign god. And they actually kind of respected this fanatical zeal. And the Christians, as I've said before, benefit from this because for the first few decades, they are identified as a Jewish sect, and they fly under the Roman radar. The Jews resented Roman overlordship of their lands and the high taxes and corruption it brought, and they had a very contentious relationship with Pontius Pilate. Pilate had attempted to place silver shields in Jerusalem to honor the Emperor Tiberius, who was his patron, And the Jews objected so vehemently that they were at the point of rebelling. And Pilate removed the shields to keep the peace, but the Jews never really trusted him, and he didn't particularly like them. He didn't spend all that much time in Jerusalem. In fact, he stayed more in Caesarea, which was a Roman settlement in Judea, but that was founded by the Romans and acted as their capital. So he didn't really end up staying in Jerusalem very much at all. Rome has first put Jerusalem under its first siege, as we've discussed, in 63 BC under Pompey. The Romans encircled the city wall with a wall of their own, which prevented supplies from getting in and from people getting out. They used siege towers and battering rams to overcome the city's walls. And when they breached the wall, they went on a rampage that killed about 12,000 inhabitants. So take the city of Steinbach, back off 3,000 people. That's how many people were slaughtered. Pompey desecrated the temple by entering the Holy of Holies, and he permitted the temple rites to pick up and continue the next day. So he wasn't there to overturn Judaism. He was there to establish Roman dominance. The Romans played the warring. We're kind of going back here to the 20-year period between Rome coming in to Judea with the Hasmonean crisis until Herod comes around. So the Romans play the two warring brothers against each other until they just get tired of it, and then they install Herod the Great, who is an Idumean again, as king in 40 BC, and that ends the Hasmonean dynasty. And Herod is, of course, a great builder. He rebuilds and enhances the temple. He builds massive walls around Jerusalem. He builds fortresses around Judea, which include Masada, which will be very important later on. So Jesus foretold the fate of Jerusalem, the final fate of Jerusalem. In Luke 21:20-24, he says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are in the city depart. And let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are the days of vengeance, to fulfill all that is written. Alas for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days. For there will be great distress upon the earth, and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword, and be led captive among all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And indeed, that's what happened. In AD 66, the Jews began to object to Rome's heavy taxation policy, and a Jewish group called the Zealots initiated a guerrilla war campaign which attacked and killed Roman citizens. Now, Roman citizenship, as we've discussed earlier, is an important thing, and Romans take their citizenship quite seriously. If you attack a Roman citizen, that is cause for war. Now, think about your citizenship today. If you were in a foreign country and agents of that foreign country attacked you, what do you think Canada would do? Probably protest formally and not much else. But in Roman times, if you attacked one of their citizens, they declared war. And this is what they have here. So the Roman governor, who was at the time a guy named Gessius Florus, plunders the temple in retaliation for these murders, and he arrests a number of prominent Jews. Earlier, just as an aside, Caligula had ordered statues of himself placed in the temple and in synagogues throughout the empire, and that combined with Pilate's enmity towards the Jews caused a lot of mistrust of the Jews by the Romans and of the Romans by the Jews. So this is really a bad relationship that is kind of hitting its head here. The Jews used guerrilla warfare. Initially, the Jewish use of guerrilla warfare initially worked very well against Rome's traditional field formations, and they held off the Roman armies for about a year. But then in 67, Nero appointed a highly respected and highly competent general, a guy named Vespasian, to oversee the Jewish campaign. And he is brutal. Josephus records that he killed or sold into slavery 100,000 Jews from the Valley of Galilee alone. So go take a look at Galilee, the Sea of Galilee. From the valley, he took 100,000 of those people and either slaughtered them or sold them into slavery. He is dealing with this now as a total war issue. In AD 68, Nero is overthrown. He's declared an outlaw. He kills himself. Vespasian goes to Rome, because he's been declared the emperor by the army, and the Senate invites him to take power. He appoints his son, the future emperor Titus, to take his place leading the Roman campaign against the Jews. Titus is a very good general, and he continues the scorched earth policy of Vespasian, but on a larger scale. His goal is to create tens of thousands of refugees who will flee for sanctuary to the only strong point they know, which is Jerusalem. However, the problem with this is that the city's resources are not large enough to sustain this influx of people along with its own population. Titus arrives at Jerusalem in AD 70 after scorching and pillaging the countryside around it, and Jerusalem is heavily fortified against attack, and Titus decides to siege the city using the tactic of circumvallation. So Titus has systematically scorched the countryside to make sure that there are no supplies for anybody out there. The only supplies that exist are those from his own supply train for the Roman army. So circumvallation looks something like this. So basically, it's surrounding a city with a wall to prevent supplies and reinforcements getting in or defenders from getting out. Titus builds his wall just out of range of the Jewish defenders of Jerusalem, so that their missiles, their missiles, their arrows, they can't hit the wall, and they can't do anything to the wall that the Romans are building. And this is what the Romans are building. Now, this, you have to remember, this defensive position would be facing the city, not facing outside to the back of the Romans. This would be facing in towards the city. And this is kind of what it looks like. You have this wall on top of a mound here with some spikes. There might be a moat. You'll see a moat right here. This prevents anybody from getting out, any supplies from getting in, and is intended to starve the city. Remember, Herod had built those strong walls, so the Romans weren't able to siege it or to attack it as much as they had before. Ancient war is really brutal. So before the siege, Jerusalem, as I've said, has been packed full of refugees, people fleeing from the Roman army, and now they're trapped inside the city, and all these extra people are causing Jerusalem's supplies to dwindle very quickly. Famine takes hold very quickly, and the defenders start forcing people who are not active fighters to leave. These include women, children, the elderly, and the sick. The Romans do not let these people, the Romans being on a total war footing, they adopt a very brutal tactic. They do not let these people through their wall. So these people are forced to stay between Jerusalem and the Romans, and they're not allowed back in Jerusalem. So as they're dying of thirst and hunger, they're between the walls, and the people on the walls, their loved ones, have to hear this. And it's quite brutal. If you can imagine being a defender and hearing your loved ones die out there, and you can't do anything to help them. The Romans take it a step further, and to demoralize the defenders of Jerusalem, they decide that anybody they capture between the city and themselves, they're going to crucify. So anybody caught in this no man's land is crucified on top of their wall in full view of the city. And in some cases, this can be upwards of 500 people a day, as recorded by Josephus. It is brutal. So not only are they dying in the no man's land between the wall, you're seeing your loved ones up on the Roman wall, writhing in agony, taking days and days and days to die because of the Roman cruelty in this regard. It is total war. The Zealots attempted to motivate their men in the city, and they decide the best way to motivate these guys is to burn our food stores. And that will motivate them to fight. But in the end, it just ends up making you weaker and less able to defend yourself. And zealotry in this case is often very stupid. The Romans managed to breach the wall, and they ransack the city after 7 months, and they burn it to the ground. The Romans slaughter everybody, or lots of people, most of the population. In some cases, it's recorded that streets ran ankle or even knee deep with blood. The Zealots held out on the Temple Mount, but it was nonetheless overthrown, and the temple itself was destroyed, and its treasures carted off to Rome. So again, when the Bible prophesies that not one stone will be left on top of another, it was true. And you'll see the advice of Jesus is very clear. Don't flee to the city, flee to the hills. Don't go to the city. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Don't do it. So if you're a Christian and you took the advice of Jesus and did not go to the city when the Romans were scorching the earth, you would probably survive. If you went to the city, you probably didn't. This is the Arch of Titus. It was erected in the Forum in Rome to celebrate the victory of Titus over the Jews. And you'll see some friezes on it, which demonstrate or which depict the Romans carting off Jewish temple treasures, including the menorah, which you can see here. So the Jewish historian Josephus gives an account of the fall of Jerusalem. Josephus is a Pharisee. He's a rebel. He's part of the Jewish army. He's caught by Titus, and instead of being enslaved or killed, he's paid to be his official historian. Josephus has a lot of insight into the campaign due to his being in the Roman headquarters and also having been a Jewish general, a Pharisee. He understands both sides. He records the run-up to the siege and relates some pretty interesting things that happened at the time. And I'm not going to read those here for time, but essentially there was a lot of portents that occurred in the sky that Josephus records, including fiery armies clashing with each other over Jerusalem. He recounts the voice like a whirlwind in the temple one evening. The great bronze gates open of their own accord, and there's a great voice and the rushing of the wind. And the voice says, "Let us proceed hence," or "Let us leave here." And then some people saw this as a portent of favor, but others saw it as a portent of doom. There was a sword-shaped star that appeared above Jerusalem in this time. There was a guy who was prophesying the downfall of Jerusalem. He's prophesying, "Woe, woe to Jerusalem." And he did this for years and years and years, annoying the Jewish leaders who beat him up, beat him nearly to death. And it was during the Roman siege when the Romans threw a stone into the city with a catapult that he was killed by that stone. So lots of different things. It's very interesting to read. And Tacitus also recalls some of these items in his writing. The temple, ironically or not, fell the same day that it had fallen to Nebuchadnezzar on the 9th day of Av, the month of Av, when Nebuchadnezzar took the temple when it was ransacked the first time. So interesting fact there. So Tacitus recalls in his histories, prodigies had occurred, which this nation, prone to superstition, but hating all religious rites, remember Tacitus thinks the Jews are atheists and irreligious, did not deem it lawful to expiate by offering or sacrifice. So he's essentially saying that there were all these bad omens and the Jews did nothing to appease the gods to deal with them. There had been seen hosts joining battles in the skies, the fiery gleam of arms, the temple illuminated by a sudden radiance from the clouds. The doors of the inner shrine were suddenly thrown open, and a voice of more than mortal tone was heard to cry that the gods were departing. At the same instant there was a mighty stir as of departure, and some few put a fearful meaning on these events, but in most there was a firm persuasion that, that in the ancient records of their priests was contained a prediction of how this very time of the East was to grow powerful, and rulers coming from Judea were to acquire universal empire. They're talking about Jesus there, but they're misinterpreting the biblical prophecy of the king. So they're thinking that the time is coming when they will have dominion and temporal power, but the time had come and gone. Jesus had come. He is the king of universal empire. But in any case, again, misinterpretation here on their part. These mysterious prophecies had pointed to Vespasian and Titus, in Tacitus's view, but the common people, with the usual blindness of ambition, had interpreted these mighty destinies of themselves, and they could not be brought, even by disasters, to believe the truth. I have heard that the total number of the besieged, of every age and both sexes, amounted to 600,000. So 600,000 people trapped in Jerusalem. That's a bit less. That's about 150,000 people less than Winnipeg. All who were able bore arms, and a number more than proportionate to the population had the courage to do so. Men and women showed equal resolution. Equal resolution, and life seemed more terrible than death if they were to be forced to leave their country. Such was this city and nation, and Titus Caesar, seeing that the position forbade an assault, or any more of the more rapid operations of war, determined to proceed by earthworks and covered approaches. The legions had their respective duties assigned to them, and there was a cessation from fighting till all the inventions used in ancient warfare or designed by modern ingenuity for the reduction of cities was constructed. So that's Tacitus's account of the fall of Jerusalem, and he's quoting several of the items that Josephus also notes that had happened. So the end of rebellion comes with the fall of Masada. So Masada, this is the great mount of Masada, where the fortress of Masada was located. As you can see, it's very strategic. It's on a cliff with a bunch of sheer faces, very difficult to get to, easily defensible position. The Zealots held out, despite the fact that the fall of Jerusalem really knocked the wind out of this rebellion. And the Romans, approaching Masada, which was one of Herod's fortresses that he built, surround it and they siege it. And you can see the remains of the Roman camp are still outlined on the ground. You can see it there. They built a ramp up to the city. And the remains of the ramp are still there. If you go to Jerusalem or if you go to Israel, you'll see the ramp and you'll see the Roman camp. It's still there. It's amazing. The defenders, however, did not surrender to the Romans, but they killed themselves in a mass suicide. So basically what happened was the men went around killing all the women and children, and then they went around killing each other, and then at the end they drew lots for who would die and who had to kill themselves. So the Romans entered the city basically when everybody was dead, and they actually kind of had a grudging respect for that. So in the end, Titus succeeded his father as emperor, and he would be succeeded by his brother Domitian. The Jews will revolt one more time in 132 to 135, and this is known as the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Emperor Hadrian, at this time, sick of rebellions and instability in the region, determines that he will wipe out any notion or memory of Judea as a separate or independent region. And the Jews are therefore barred from Jerusalem except for one day a year, and he renames the city Aelia Capitolina. Jerusalem will not really be a city of importance, again, in terms of economic strength or political strength until the Crusades or the 20th century, depending on your point of view. It kind of loses its importance despite being important religious-wise. It's not as big a deal after its fall under Hadrian. And the Jews of the diaspora integrate into Roman culture more easily than the Jews of Judea. So the Jews who lived in Judea maintain their independence and their distinct culture and religion and society more easily than the Jews who lived in other Roman cities. And in fact, they are the ones who joined the church quite a bit because their identity was not as much centered on there. So that's Roman Judea. That's the relationship between the Jews and the Roman Empire. It's very contentious, rarely peaceful, very contentious. The church benefit. So basically, there's a few things you can take away from this that are important to remember. The Romans and the Jews, they had a contentious and hostile relationship. The early church benefited from the exemption from Roman religious policy granted to the Jews. The fall of Jerusalem not only fulfilled the prophecies of Jesus, but his prophecy also told people how to survive it. Rome's tactics are brutal towards those who oppose them, and Rome's destruction of the temple and the ending of temple worship will aid the church in moving beyond Jewish rites. Judaism and Christianity suffer a permanent split and they drift apart. The Judaizers have nothing to focus on after this. The temple was a center of Jewish worship and Jewish religious rites, so that ends with the fall of the temple, and so the church now moves into a more blossoming stage where it more fully moves about the empire. So there you go. Questions and discussion. If you have any questions for me, you can email them to me like normal. And this will catch you all up on where the people who have been with us from the beginning have been as well. Hopefully you found this useful, and we'll see you in the new year.